Welcome to Dusk Haven Sleep Stories, a quiet place where the day gently fades and soft stories carry you into rest. Tonight, we are leaving the noise of the day behind and stepping into the desert. Not the desert of heat and glare and restless wind, but the desert as it is at midnight. Cool, hushed, lit only by a high silver moon. This is the Sonoran Desert. In the quiet hour when the saguaros stand like old sentinels and the night blooming cereus, a flower that opens only once a year, only after dark begins slowly to unfurl. There is nothing you need to do tonight. Nothing to solve, nowhere to be. Just let your body sink into the bed beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften and your breathing slow. If you start to drift before the story ends, good. That is exactly what this is for. So, settle in. Get comfortable, and let's walk together into the moonlit dark of the desert, where one flower is about to bloom. The sun had gone down hours ago, and the desert was finally allowed to rest. All day, the sand had taken in the heat, grain by grain, until even the shadows seemed to shimmer. But now, beneath a sky gone the color of dark glass, the land was exhaling. Slowly, patiently, the warmth lifted from the ground in invisible threads, rising past the dry grasses, past the sleeping lizards tucked beneath flat stones, and disappearing into the cool air above. There was a stillness to this hour that older desert creatures understood instinctively. It was the hour when the desert became, briefly, gentle. A small caravan of saguaro cacti stood along a low ridge, their arms raised at odd angles, as though they had been caught mid-gesture decades ago and simply decided to hold the pose forever. Some leaned slightly, weathered by seasons of wind. Others stood arrow straight, having grown undisturbed for over 100 years. They did not need to move. They had nowhere else to be. Between them, in the cooling sand, the moon began its slow climb over the eastern ridge. Not the full, brilliant moon of midsummer, but a quieter moon, 3/4 round, casting a soft silver wash over the land. It touched the tips of the ocotillo branches first, then slid down across the barrel cacti, then pooled finally on the desert floor, where it caught on the tiny crystals of sand and made the whole basin glimmer like a still lake. Somewhere in the distance, a great horned owl shifted on a dead mesquite branch, fluffed her feathers once, and settled again into watchful quiet. And near the base of an old leaning rock formation, one that had stood there since long before any road had been built, nearby, a single plant waited. It looked, by daylight, like nothing remarkable. A tangle of thin, gray-green stems, easily mistaken for a dead shrub, easily overlooked by hikers moving toward more obvious wonders. The Sonoran night-blooming cereus kept its secret well. For 364 days of the year, it asked for nothing. It simply existed, modest and unhurried, drawing what little moisture it could from deep roots, waiting. But tonight was the 365th day. Tonight, after months of quiet preparation, invisible to any passing eye, a single bud at the end of one gray stem had begun, almost imperceptibly, to soften. No one was watching. No one needed to be. The desert did not perform for an audience. It simply continued, breath by breath, exactly as it always had. The moon rose a little higher. The sand, far below the surface where the heat of the day still lingered faintly, began its long cooling. And the bud, swollen and pale at its tip, trembled very slightly in the breeze. Not yet ready, but close. So close. For now, it was enough to simply wait. To let the night arrive in its own time. To let the desert settle fully into its hours of rest. And if you, too, are settling, sinking a little deeper into your pillow, feeling the weight of your own day lifting off your shoulders, then you are doing exactly what this hour is for. There is no need to hurry the bloom. There is no need to hurry sleep either. Both will come in their own quiet time. An hour passed, perhaps more. Time moved differently out here, measured not in minutes, but in the gradual journey of the moon across the sky, and in the almost invisible work of the bud at the base of the old stone. The first sign was barely a sign at all. The outer sepals, thin and waxy and the color of old parchment, loosened their tight embrace by the width of a single thread. Then a little more. The bud, which had pointed skyward like a closed fist for so many weeks, tilted gently as if testing the air. The temperature had dropped further now, cool enough that the saguaro's deep ribs, those vertical pleats running the length of their trunks, had begun to contract almost imperceptibly, the way they did every night, drawing the columns slightly narrower as stored water settled lower inside them. It was a small, patient breathing, repeated nightly for 100 years or more, so slow that no human eye could ever catch it happening, only notice, weeks later, that it had. Around the base of the Sirius, the sand held a particular kind of softness. Sand that has cooled overnight becomes different from sand baked all day, looser, almost silken, capable of holding the faint imprint of a passing kit fox's paw, or the long, dragging trail of a desert tortoise who had ambled through hours before, unhurried the way tortoises always are. The tortoise, in fact, was still nearby. She had wedged herself into a shallow burrow beneath a creosote bush a little earlier in the evening, her domed shell now barely distinguishable from the rock around her. Her breathing had slowed to the long, even rhythm of deep rest. Tortoises understood something about patience that few other creatures matched. A life measured in decades, where a single night was nothing at all, where there was no need to rush toward morning. Above, the moon had climbed further still, no longer touching the eastern ridge, but riding clear and high, casting the whole basin in a wash of silvered light. Where moonlight touched the white sand, it seemed almost to glow faintly from within, as though the desert itself were lit by some soft, internal lantern, rather than merely reflecting borrowed light from 250,000 miles away. The bud continued its slow unfolding. It happened in increments too small to perceive in any single moment. But if you had simply remained patient, watching nothing else, you would eventually have noticed that the once tight sepals now stood open at an angle, like the fingers of a hand just beginning to release a held breath. Beneath them, the first edge of white petals showed, pale and faintly luminous, still curled tight as a secret. The Sirius did not bloom for show. It bloomed because some ancient signal temperature and moisture, and the particular slant of moonlight at this time of year, told it that tonight, and only tonight, the conditions were correct. It would offer its flower for a single night, perhaps drawing the attention of a sphinx moth or a long-nosed bat traveling miles through the dark in search of nectar. And then, by the heat of tomorrow's sun, it would close forever, the bloom spent, the work of an entire year folded back into stillness. There was something in this that the desert seemed to understand better than most places. That some of the most beautiful things are not meant to last, and need not last, to matter. A light breeze moved through the wash, carrying with it the dry mineral scent of sun-baked stone, now finally cooling, mixed faintly with the green, herbal smell of creosote that always seemed to intensify after the smallest hint of moisture in the air. It was the smell the locals called the smell of rain, even on nights when no rain came at all, simply the scent of desert plants releasing their oils into cooler, damper air. The owl on her dead mesquite branch turned her head, slow and silent, toward a small rustle in the grass, a kangaroo rat, perhaps, making its cautious rounds, and then, deciding it was not yet worth the effort, settled back into watchfulness without moving from her perch. Time continued to soften and stretch. If your eyes have grown heavy by now, there is nothing wrong with that. You do not need to follow every word. You can simply let the rhythm of this place hold you. The slow unfurling above the sand, the slower breathing beneath it, the patient, ancient quiet of a desert that has never once been in a hurry to reach morning. Let your own breathing match it if you can. In, slowly, and out, even more slowly. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, either. By the time the moon had crossed nearly a third of the visible sky, the bud at the base of the stone had transformed entirely. The outer sepals, once tightly closed, now spread wide and backward, like the petals of an enormous pale star reaching into the darkness. And within them, the true flower had begun its final unfolding. Layer after layer of slender white petals, each one faintly waxy to the touch, each one catching the moonlight along its curved edge, so that the entire blossom seemed to hold a soft glow of its own, distinct from the silver wash of the sky above. It was, by any measure, an enormous flower for such an unassuming plant wider across than a human hand, trumpet-shaped, opening toward the sky as though offering itself entirely to the night. At its center, countless thread-like stamens rose in a pale, golden crown, and beneath them, the flower had already begun to release its fragrance. It was unlike any scent found in the daylight desert. Sweet, but not cloying, something closer to vanilla, mixed with a faint citrus brightness. And beneath that, something deeper and almost musky, designed across thousands of years of evolution for one single purpose: to be detected from a great distance by something flying through the dark in search of exactly this. The scent moved outward in slow waves, carried by the same gentle breeze that had earlier stirred the creosote, drifting low across the sand, curling around the base of the saguaros, reaching even the shallow burrow where the desert tortoise slept on. Undisturbed, her ancient patience requiring no flowers at all to find its peace. Somewhere above the wash, a shape moved through the darkness. Not a bird, but something smaller, quicker. Its wings beating in swift, silent strokes. A lesser long-nosed bat, drawn from miles away by precisely this fragrance, banking now toward the pale glow of the open blossom. It hovered for a moment above the flower, wings a blur against the moonlight, and then dipped its long, narrow tongue deep into the trumpet of petals, drawing out the sweet nectar pooled at its base. For a few seconds, bat and blossom existed in perfect, quiet partnership, the flower offering its single night of nourishment, the bat carrying away on the fine hairs of its face a dusting of pollen that would travel with it to the next cereus bloom, somewhere else across this vast, dark land. And then the bat lifted away, vanishing back into the night sky, leaving the flower trembling gently in the place where its wings had stirred the air. The blossom, having done its essential work, did not close. It would remain open through these dark hours, patient and luminous, in case other visitors might come. A sphinx moth, perhaps, drawn by the same fragrance, its wings a soft blur, as it too hovered and fed. Beneath the great flower, the old stone formation held the day's last warmth deep within its cracks, releasing it now in faint, almost imperceptible breaths against the cooling night air. Lizards that had tucked themselves into those same cracks hours earlier slept on, their small bodies utterly still, their pulse slowed to match the slow pulse of the desert itself. Above it all, the moon continued its unhurried arc, indifferent to time as humans measured it, content simply to illuminate whatever lay beneath its stone, sand, saguaro. And now, one perfect, glowing flower, fully open at last. if you are still here with me, drifting somewhere between waking and sleep, simply let this image rest in your mind. One white flower, glowing softly under moonlight, asking nothing, offering everything, for just this one quiet night. There is no need to hold on to the story from here. You can let it go, the way the bat let go of the blossom, the way the desert lets go of the day's heat. Just float gently in this stillness. The night deepened further. Far across the basin, beyond the reach of the Sirius's pale glow, the desert continued its quiet inventory of small, sleeping lives. A pack of kit foxes had curled together in a den dug beneath the roots of an old ironwood tree, their thin bodies pressed close for warmth, their breathing slow and synchronized, the smallest of them twitching faintly now and then in some dream of the day's hunting. Nearby, a colony of harvester ants slept in tunnels dug many feet beneath the surface. Far below the reach of the day's heat or the night's cold, in chambers that stayed at almost exactly the same gentle temperature year-round. A stillness so complete it seemed to exist outside of time altogether. And high above, where the desert floor gave way to a low outcrop of weathered granite, the rock itself seemed to hold its own kind of patience. These stones had been here for millions of years, shaped slowly by wind and rare flash floods, and the relentless, grinding patience of time. Tonight, under moonlight, their rounded surfaces gleamed faintly silver, smooth in places where centuries of sand had polished them, rough in others where ancient cracks still ran deep. It was easy, looking at such stone in the gentle dark, to feel something settle inside you. A reminder that not everything needs to hurry. That some things, the most enduring things, are shaped slowly, patiently, without urgency, over far longer spans of time than any single night could measure. The serious blossom, meanwhile, continued to hold its open form, untroubled by the passing hours. Its petals had lost none of their luminous white glow. If anything, as the moon climbed higher and brighter overhead, the flowers seemed to drink in even more of that pale light, holding it gently within its waxy curves. A second visitor arrived some time later. Not a bat this time, but a sphinx moth. Its wings beating so quickly, they blurred entirely into a soft gray haze. Hovering with extraordinary precision just above the blossom's center. It fed for only a few moments, its long proboscis curling delicately into the depths of the flower. And then it, too, lifted away into the dark, carrying its small portion of pollen onward. The flower did not seem to mind being visited, nor would it mind, eventually, being left entirely alone. It existed for this single night, regardless of who came to witness it. There was something deeply restful in that thought, that worth does not depend on an audience. That some of the most beautiful moments in this world unfold quietly, completely unwitnessed, simply because it was their time to unfold. The breeze had grown even gentler now, barely a whisper moving low across the sand, just enough to occasionally stir the fine, papery petals at the blossom's edge, just enough to carry its fragrance another few dozen yards further into the dark. Somewhere out past the ridge, the great horned owl finally lifted from her dead mesquite branch, wings spreading wide and silent, and glided low and slow across the wash, more out of habit than urgency. She circled once, found nothing worth pursuing, and settled onto a new perch atop a tall saguaro, where she resumed her watch over a desert that, for now, asked nothing more of her than simple presence. Everything in this hour seemed to exist in the same unhurried key. The stone did not need to hurry its erosion. The ants did not need to hurry their sleep. The blossom did not need to hurry its bloom toward morning. And you, listening now, drifting somewhere between this story and your own dreams, do not need to hurry toward sleep either. It will come. It always does. In its own quiet time, the same way the moon continues its long, patient arc above a desert that has never once needed convincing to rest. Time slipped further into the deepest part of the night, that quiet, suspended hour when even the desert's nocturnal creatures begin, one by one, to settle. The kit foxes in their den beneath the ironwood roots had stopped their faint, dreaming twitches, and now lay in complete stillness, their small chests rising and falling in slow, even rhythm. The kangaroo rat that had earlier startled the owl's attention had long since returned to its burrow, tucked safely below ground, where the temperature remained gentle and constant, no matter how the surface world shifted between blazing days and cooling nights. Even the harvester ants, far below, seemed to exist in a stillness so complete it bordered on something timeless. Countless small lives, utterly motionless, woven into tunnels that had taken generations to dig. Patient structures built grain by creatures who would never see the finished result, content simply that the work continued. Above ground, the Sirius blossom remained open, though its glow had softened somewhat now, as if it too were settling into a quieter phase of its single night. The fragrance still drifted, fainter now, into air that had grown cool enough that thin tendrils of mist began, in low patches near the wash, to form a rare and delicate sight in a desert more accustomed to dryness. Born only of these specific hours, when temperature and humidity aligned just enough to let moisture condense low against the cooling sand. The mist did not rise far. It simply pooled, ankle-deep, ghostly, and pale in the moonlight, draping itself gently over the low places in the wash, curling faintly around the base of the saguaros, softening the hard edges of stone into something dreamlike. It was the kind of sight that, had any human wanderer been present to witness it, might have made them stop entirely, breath caught, simply to take it in moonlight, mist, and one luminous white flower glowing softly above it all, utterly silent, utterly still. But no one needed to witness it for it to be real. The desert continued exactly as it always had, indifferent to audience, faithful only to its own slow rhythms. The moon, by now, had crossed more than half its visible arc, riding high and clear above the basin, its light growing, if anything, more silvered and complete as the hour deepened. Stars scattered themselves in countless thousands across the dark spaces around it. Far more than could ever be seen from a city, far enough from any artificial light that the full breadth of the Milky Way arched faintly overhead, a pale river of light stretching from one horizon to the other. Beneath that vast, quiet sky, the old stone formation continued its million-year patience. The saguaros stood in their silent rows, arms raised in poses held for decades. The tortoise slept on in her burrow, the kit foxes in theirs, the owl on her high perch, watchful but calm. And the serious blossom, having given its nectar to a passing bat and a passing moth, having released its fragrance into miles of quiet desert air, having asked nothing and required nothing beyond this one night to fully exist, simply continued to glow, soft and white, beneath the vast turning sky. If you have already drifted past these words into sleep, that is exactly as it should be. And if you are still here, drifting somewhere in that soft space between thought and dream, let yourself stay there a while longer. There is no need to follow the story all the way to its end. The desert will keep unfolding gently, slowly, regardless of whether you are awake to hear it. Just rest. Just breathe. Just let the mist settle low over the sand, and let your own thoughts settle the same way, low and quiet and still. Far off, though still some hours away, the first whisper of change would eventually come. A faint lightening at the very edge of the eastern horizon, so subtle that only the most patient watcher might notice it, arriving long before the sky changed color. But that hour was not yet here. For now, the desert remained suspended in its deepest, most peaceful dark. The moon still high, the stars still countless, the mist still pooling low and silver across the wash. The serious blossom, in these final hours of its single bloom, had begun the slowest part of its transformation, not yet closing, but settling. The bright tension of full bloom giving way to something softer, more relaxed. The petals drooping just slightly at their outer edges, as though the flower itself were growing pleasantly tired after the long work of its one important night. It had done everything it was meant to do. It had opened fully under the moon. It had offered its fragrance across the wash. It had fed a bat and a moth, exchanging a small portion of pollen with each, ensuring that somewhere out across the wider desert, other cereus plants might one day produce their own seeds, their own future bloomers, their own single nights of brilliance still decades away. There was no urgency in its winding down, the same way there had been no urgency in its earlier opening. Everything about the series moved at exactly the pace the desert itself moved slow, deliberate, untroubled by any clock but its own internal one, shaped by centuries of evolution to know precisely when to begin, and precisely when, eventually, to rest. Around it, the desert continued its own version of the same quiet wisdom. The saguaros, who would stand in that same spot long after this particular bloom had closed and withered, who might stand for another century yet, content with growing perhaps only an inch some years, more in wetter ones, never hurrying, never striving, simply persisting. The stone, who had been patient for millions of years already, and would remain patient for millions more, slowly being worn by wind and rare rain, into shapes too gradual for any single lifetime to witness completing. The tortoise, sleeping still in her burrow, who might live for 80 years or more, who measured her life not in days, but in slow, unhurried decades, who had nowhere else she needed to be tonight or any night. And you too, wherever you are now in this gentle drift towards sleep, have nowhere else you need to be. No need to hurry toward morning. No need to solve anything, fix anything, or accomplish anything more tonight than simply resting. The mist continued its low silver pooling across the wash. The moon continued its slow crossing of the sky. The blossom continued its gentle, unhurried settling. Somewhere, far across the basin, a second night blooming Sirius, one that had bloomed just the night before, unseen by any bat or moth, had already fully closed, its petals folded back into themselves, its single night of brilliance complete and finished, asking nothing more, leaving behind nothing but a small green seed pod that would, over the coming months, slowly swell and ripen, patient as everything else in this ancient desert. This was the quiet truth the desert seemed to whisper, over and over, through every grain of cooling sand, every century-old saguaro, every slow-blooming flower, that everything arrives in its own time. That stillness is not emptiness, but a kind of fullness all its own. That rest is not the absence of importance, but often the very thing that makes everything else possible. The night continued. The moon continued. The desert, vast and silver and endlessly patient, simply continued exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would. And here, in this gentle stillness, this is where we leave it. No need to wait for the ending. No need to follow the moon all the way down past the western ridge, or watch for that first whisper of dawn still hours away. Just stay here in the quiet, in the mist, in the moonlight. Just rest. Good night.